It might seem a little bit odd to some, and in fact even to me, that I refer to myself as the otaku gonzo journalist, considering that I'm pretty staunchly anti-labels in general, and otaku is such a broad term that I don't think has a clear understanding. It really falls in with the kind of terms that I have such a problem with. But as I've said a few times in the past, the reason I'm willing to call myself an otaku is that there is nothing associated with that word that I think is necessarily untrue of me. Otaku is mostly thought of as meaning an obsessive fan. Someone who dedicates way more time and energy to something than what is rational. In Japan, otaku does not necessarily mean that you're an anime or manga otaku, though it is mostly used that way. There's also stuff like train otaku, people who are just really into something. And any of the connotations that it might have, that otaku is like a creepy fatso who lives in a parent's attic. Normally say basement, but my room is more like an attic. Granted, I don't live with my parents anymore, but any stigma you could attach to otaku, I'm fine with being considered that. Doesn't really bother me. And for me, in my teen years, otaku was very much a matter of pride for me. Because as I mentioned in the previous episode, I grew up very contrarian, and not so much in the sense of I wanted to do the things that everyone else wasn't doing, but in the sense of the things I liked were things that no one else liked, so I was going to be extremely adamant about the things I liked. I was going to be like, no, fuck you, the things I like are cool. So because I was an otaku, I was very defensive of the idea that I was an otaku. I wore it as a badge of honor. I wanted everyone to know I'm otaku and I am proud. And that is kind of exactly the message of Otaku no Video. Otaku no Video is a 2-episode OVA that came out in 1991, which was written by Toshio Okada, who was given the nickname Ota King, a crazy-ass otaku man who helped to co-found Studio Gainax. He was sort of the benefactor of the whole thing, the guy putting everything together, wrote some of their early shows such as Gunbuster and Otaku no Video, and funded the original Daikon film that they did, Daikon 4's opening animation, 3 and 4. In the series Aoi Hono, or Blue Blazes, he's presented as this rich otaku weirdo who wants to draw in all this young talent and create a new revolution in anime production, which is kind of exactly what they did. Gainax is the only studio that did not come from a pre-existing studio, besides obviously the progenitors of all studios from the 60s and 50s. Just about every anime studio forms when someone from one studio branches off to go make their own, be it a producer, a director, whoever. Somebody will go off or some group will go off. So when you look through anime studio histories, you'll find a lot of legacy. Like, you look at Studio Bones, who broke off from Sunrise, and you can see a lot of similarities in what those two studios prioritize, what kind of work they've been doing. You can definitely tell that this other studio is a natural extension off of the previous one, but while changing things to fit its own personal ethos. And we can even see this from the studios that broke away from Gainax, such as Gonzo and Trigger, which are both pretty reflective of what Gainax was about around the time that they broke away from it. But Gainax itself was started by a group of college students, essentially, who got together with some other people from the outside, created Daikon Film, grew it from there, eventually became Gainax, and started making their own films. And while they had ties to stuff like Ghibli, because Hideaki Anno worked on the Nazca of the Valley of the Wind film, which was even before Ghibli existed, but it was right before Ghibli existed. They had connections to other stuff, but they were their own entity that came sort of out of the ether, and they really had a lot of pride in this idea of themselves as the otaku studio. People who just really loved anime, and that's why they were going to make it. I think particularly Toshio Okada was probably the one with that mindset, because he seems to be the guy who was all about this whole idea of the otaku, hence writing Otaku no Video. The plot of Otaku no Video is that this college student who's a tennis player, he's got a cute girlfriend, he's just kind of a normie guy, gets reacquainted with a friend of his from high school who has become a full-blown otaku. Maybe it was even middle school. Someone he hasn't seen in a long time. He reacquaints with this guy. And this guy has his group of friends who are all these really hardcore otaku dudes who spend all their time building Gunpla and watching anime and like frame by framing it on VHS tapes and stuff. Like, all they they do is obsess over otaku culture. They're always making references to Gundam and shit. And at first, they look at the main guy as just like kind of a normie dude who they don't really want around them, but as he starts to hang out, he takes an interest in this otaku culture. And over the course of the first episode, he basically slowly gets indoctrinated into it, and he keeps getting more and more interested. Soon he finds himself doing a cosplay of Cobra from Space Adventure Cobra at a convention. He's slowly gaining weight. He ends up losing his girlfriend, losing his place on the tennis team, and becoming deeply embroiled in otaku culture, which he enjoys, but it kind of starts ruining his life because everyone's just looking at him like he's a worse person for being an otaku. But then at the end, he has this moment where he's like, well, wait a minute, what the fuck? Like, why does me having this particular set of interests somehow make me a lower member of society? How is this not okay, but what everyone else does is? Fuck these people. I'm going to show them that as an otaku, I can take over the world, that I can make this culture the primary culture. And so the second episode is about him and his little studio setting out to do exactly that. And they do this in a lot of the same ways that Gainax sort of got developed, where it's a grassroots animation studio who produces a short animation, but their little touches such as adding in breast bounce, which is exactly what they did. Gainax invented bouncing titties. They were like the first animators to have this, like, when a girl moves, her tits will jiggle and stuff, which you will later see goes on to Gonzo, and kind of their whole output very much continues the Gainaxing tradition. But yeah, that's like part of what they put into this little short that they make, and then they merchandise it heavily. They start creating their own figures, like they figure out how to make cheaper figures that they can produce in a different way from what's being sold at the time and get them to people faster and cheaper. And they just basically create all these different little merchandising methods, a lot of which Gainax was doing at the time. Now, I don't have as much info about this as I wish I did, but one of the things that's not all that understood about Gainax in the early 90s is that they were not just doing anime. They were doing figures and stuff. They were making things. They made a bunch of visual novel games. They made the Princess Maker series, which today its legacy sort of lives on in that game, Long Live the Queen. It's kind of a throwback to what the Princess Maker games were. They had a strip Mahjong Evangelion game and the, what's it called? World's Strongest Girlfriend, I think is the Eva visual novel. They had a bunch of early PC games, or maybe they'd be DOS. I don't remember what computers from that era are referred to as. In any case, Gainax had sort of an empire that they were trying to build. And Otaku no Video tells the story of these characters building an empire. And of course, it goes way over the top in episode 2, where, like, the girl who had broken up with the main character in episode 1, like, hooks up with this big businessman who's, like, their main rival as they're trying to build this studio, and they're getting all this stuff done, but then it all gets taken away at one point. They reach a low point, but then this girl who's been the assistant all along turns out that she can draw character designs, and they rebuild everything, and at the very end, they build an otaku paradise, a theme park of otaku glory, because they have now achieved becoming the main culture on Earth. And then they fucking get into like a big Ideon, and they blast off into space, and it's a total Gainax ending, a really bizarre, weird way to end a thing that goes so far over the top that it's just beyond reality at this point, as Gainaxes want to do with their shows. The Gainax ending, as TV Trope calls it. And intercut with this story that's going on, because each of these is a 50-minute OVA episode, but the actual animation is probably about the length of one episode. Intercut with it is all of these weird-ass live-action clips where they're interviewing different otaku, all of whom have their faces blurred out and their voices pitch shifted up, and they're all just like kind of awkward, weird guys. I mean, these are obviously like staged interviews for the most part, but the idea is that they're all like ashamed to admit that they're otaku, but they're all really hardcore, and like they increasingly get more open and more out there as the series goes along. But the whole thing is just basically meant to create a portrait of what is an otaku, what are the challenges that otaku are facing in society, and how are they going to deal with it. And the way that they choose to deal with it is to say, fuck you, we do what we want, and we're gonna make everyone else love it. Now, if this philosophy sounds familiar to something that I've said before about my own content, that is most likely a correlation, because the way that I've chosen to handle the content that I produce is that I don't come to the audience. I try to bring the audience to me. I like the shows I like. I do not try to have my tastes match what other people care about. I'm not going to talk about shows just because they're popular. What I would rather do is to make other people like my shows, make my shows popular. You know, if there's something that I like that no one else understands, I want to make you all understand it and have you come to me. I want to spread my culture, to make it more dominant, to try to take over with otakudom. So Otaku no Video is very much my whole ethos, my whole way of life is represented by this OVA. I haven't seen this OVA in a long time, but unlike a lot of other stuff on this list, I have seen it a lot of times, and therefore I still have pretty good memory of it, and I don't feel like my opinions of it would change too drastically if I saw it again, because Otaku no Video was the inspiration for the American anime convention Otakon, which I've gone to almost every year since 2008 because it's in Baltimore, it's not that far away, it's a day's drive, so I've gone there many times, and every convention they open by playing Otaku no Video. They play it at the very beginning and the very end of every Otakon. Now, I don't exactly go to watch it every time. I've probably only actually caught it twice, 2.5 times. I think I passed out one year trying to watch it because I was so fucking tired by the end of the convention. But yeah, like, it's always played at Otakon, and I'll often go in and check it out, which is why I've seen it multiple times aside from having watched it on my own, because it really is the ultimate otaku burning passion piece of media. And like, watching it at Otakon, which for me when I was young, Otakon very much would inspire a huge amount of passion in me every time that I went. Not just because it was such a good time, but just seeing my people and sort of learning new things, because I used to go to lots of these panels where they'd be explaining anime history and stuff and all this different shit, which was always great. Unfortunately, I learned so much that now none of those panels are actually helpful to me because they can't tell me anything I don't already know. And Otakon is just kind of boring for me now, but Otaku no Video definitely captures what I cared so much about in that convention and like what kind of feelings it left me with, that burning pathos, if you will, as the Ava song would put it, Atsui Patosu. And in fact, as the Otaku no Video opening would put it, because the whole thing is, the OP of this show is like a full 3-minute song, and the visuals are just flames. It's just a bunch of flames with text on top, which incidentally, kind of a difficult bar for entry for new viewers to this, that you start it up and you just have to watch a fire for minutes on end, and listen to this song that if you don't know Japanese, you don't know what the fuck the point of it is. I don't think they even subtitle it in the in whichever version they usually play. I could be wrong though. So throughout my early anime blogger days, my identity as an otaku was very important to me because it kind of lends a sense of authority in a certain way. Not a sense of authority in like my opinions are right kind of way, but in a sense of I very much understand where I'm coming from and I care very deeply about this. Like, to call yourself an otaku, to call yourself an obsessive fan, is to say that I am very confident that I know what I'm talking about, even if what I'm talking about is just my own opinions, my own feelings. Like, I want people to understand that this is not just some guy talking about anime because, you know, for the hell of it, or like some newbie or someone who doesn't have their heart in it. I want you to know that I'm talking about this because I'm deeply passionate and obsessed with it to an extent that is disturbing. I am in the thick of it as much as one could be. One of my most memorable moments of the word otaku as relating to me, there was this really weird thing that happened one time in the anime blogging community around 2010, maybe late 2009. I have no idea why the fuck this happened. It was so bizarre. But this blog sprung up called the Otaku Elimination Game. And the concept of it was that it was a secret group of hardcore militant otaku who were saying that there's all these like hundreds of anime blogs out there, and most of them are not real otaku. Most of them have no business talking about anime because they don't really have the passion for it, or they don't have the knowledge of it. I guess they were incensed by certain blogs, especially certain really big ones like Danny Chu, who sort of marketed themselves as otaku, and they had a problem with it. So basically what they did was they would make these posts like every few days where they would list 3 anime blogs and determine whether or not they thought that that blog was a real otaku. And of course this caused a huge stir in the community because, you know, when people are talked about, then they get riled up. You've all seen it happen after some of my vlogs. So the Otaku Elimination Game is going through, and they've got their big list of blogs, and they're eliminating people left and right, and I knew I was coming up soon. So I wrote a post, and this was my stance. What I said in my post is that if the Otaku Elimination Game says that I'm not an otaku, then their entire argument is invalid. Because I am such a hardcore otaku. I am so obsessed, and all I care about is anime. I eat, sleep, breathe, and shit anime. And so if they didn't say that I was an otaku, it would invalidate their whole operation. That was the content of my post, worded very sternly, and BGM'd with the second Gintama opening song, which I remember because they liked that I had done that. They, of course, praised my post and said that, of course, I was an otaku. They were like, you know, we don't know about the right... Because they would talk about... First of all, they would judge whether you were an otaku, and then they would also judge the actual quality of your writing and stuff. And so they were like, you know, we're not totally convinced about his writing, but he's definitely an otaku, so he gets to move on to round 2. Because that's the thing. The first round was just supposed to be to cull all of the non-otaku from the list, and then from there they would be like, I guess, tournament bracketing the entire blogosphere or whatever. So I made it past round 1. Unfortunately, the Otaku Elimination Game then totally just disappeared. Round 2 never happened, and a bunch of weird-ass coded messages started popping up. Now, at the time, I did not know what an ARG was, but looking back, I am almost certain that the point of it was to start an ARG. I think they were trying to get the attention of everybody in the community, and then they were going to throw a bunch of weird codes at us, and we were supposed to solve it and move on with it. I don't know if anybody did. I don't know if anybody knew what was happening, because it was really esoteric. It was not easy to understand what these codes were supposed to be, but that's what it looked like. So yeah, I think the whole point of it was that it was the beginning of an ARG, and they were just doing all this to get a player base. Genius, if that's true, and a great way to launch an ARG. Like, that's a really smart way to do it, though the opening puzzle was a bit fucking much, and there was no, like, narrative to it. You know, there's no clue that this is what's happening. I didn't know. You know, I just thought they disappeared and then got hacked or something, because they start posting all these, like, numbers and shit. And they only did, like, 3 more posts, and then the blog was dead. So, if anybody solved that ARG, then awesome. But I have no idea if it happened. Or if that's really what it was. But it really seems that way in retrospect. So anyways, yeah. I was very adamant about my identity as an otaku, and a lot of that identity had actually come from another series that I've talked about recently, which is Genshiken. Genshiken is also a story about being otaku. This one is just a down-to-earth slice-of-life series about a bunch of college-aged otaku having their club for the study of modern visual culture. And Genshiken's a really great story, and it really captures everything that otakudom was at the time in the early 2000s. I first watched the show in 2007, and for me, it kind of gave context not only to what I was feeling, because I'd been a big anime fan since 2003, but like the idea of otaku as a culture I had not known about yet. Like, to me, I knew that the word otaku existed. I considered myself one. I had a t-shirt that said otaku on it. But I just thought of anime as, you know, shows that are on TV and you buy the DVDs, you talk about them on forums. There's not much else to it. Genshiken introduces me to stuff like comic market and the idea of doujinshi, self-published works, you know, fan creations on this deeper level, this connection to video games, this idea of how otaku have like a room that's completely covered in posters and bullshit and figures. Like, I never bought any figures or anything like that. So in 2007, because of Genshiken, I got way deeper into the culture. Incidentally, that's how Victor's computer ended up in my room. I mentioned this in the previous podcast that we watched Genshiken, and I had this idea, what if we turned my room into a Genshiken room where we just all brought all of our shit up here and just had this be like a media room. Like Victor brought all his games and DVDs and shit and put them on my floor, and Shay did, and so we each had like our own little section. And for a few days we had a bunch of TVs in there and we were all playing, and then of course at some point I was like, well, I don't want to have you guys in my room all the time, so this is weird, but nonetheless, Victor's computer somehow stayed with me because he didn't really use it because he can't really read or write. As a kid, he could not really do that. So I just kind of commandeered his Mac, which I hated, but it was a computer that could connect to the internet, unlike mine. But yeah, so we sort of built a Genshiken in my room, and then when I met Don-san, who I talked about in the Welcome to the NHK podcast, see how I'm like weaving a whole narrative portrait of Digibro in 2007 across these? That wasn't even intentional. It's just come together this way. When I met Don-san, then he got me introduced to the stuff that was in Genshiken that I didn't know how to access. Like, I didn't know where to find doujinshi online. I didn't know how to torrent anime. He taught me about torrenting and got me into higher quality stuff because I was still watching like shitty ass streams, and he was like, dude, if you watch this stuff in high quality, it'll be so much better. And I remember distinctly that the first show that I torrented was Shakugan no Shana. It took me all day to download it, possibly several days. But then I had it, and it was in the mind-blowingly beautiful quality of 480p, baby. Because my monitor was probably like 720 or less. This was before 1080, before even thought of 4K existed. So 480p was like, because I think I'd seen like I think the reason I had him teach me how to torrent is that like I'd started to watch Shana, and like the OP just looked so fucking shitty and aliased in the, not aliased, what's the word I'm looking for? The low bitrate. Bitrate was so terrible on the upload that I was like, this is unwatchable. And so when I opened it up, and Shana, each episode would open with this like CG spinning graphic thing. So when I got to see that in full clarity with no fucking compression, then it was just like, oh my god, anime! Look, if you go watch Shakugan no Shana right now, it is not a beautiful show. Like, it has a pretty okay color design, and that opening graphic, and I guess the OP looked pretty impressive for the time, but the show is by no means a visual feast. But to me, seeing anime in high definition for the first time, and by high definition I mean 480p, I was just like, this is, oh my god. I remember that when Kara no Kyokai came out, then Don-san had posted all these he started an anime blog, but all he would do is post screen caps, and he posted like 1 million screen caps from Kara no Kyokai, and they just looked unbelievably high quality. Like, I'd never seen anything like it. It was driving my fucking mind up the wall. I couldn't believe how good it looked in 720p. That was like a magical, unheard of resolution. Like, what the fuck is these are just insane. 720? How do we get up to 720? And I remember the first time I saw 1080 as well, because it was Jizz in My Pants, the YouTube video. It was when YouTube incorporated HD. Maybe it was only 720, but I think it was 1080. It was when YouTube suddenly had their HD goes all the way up to the maximum. And the first video I saw in full HD was Jizz in My Pants, and that one shattered my mind as well, because that video is full of details and stuff that were only apparent in HD. I am on a complete tangent. So yeah, Genshiken introduced me to all these new otaku things. I started buying figures, I started ordering shit from Japan online. That's how I ended up with that Dakimakura of, what's her name? Uesugi Kenshin from Sengoku Rants, which I've never even played, but it was really cheap. So that whole idea, the idea of embracing the mythos and the culture of otaku, and then finding it cool, because so much of otaku culture is kind of self-deprecating, and a lot of people who are into it see themselves as like, I am a terrible person who's into all this weird, perverted shit, and I'm a failure at society and all that stuff, like more the Welcome to the NHK mindset. And I didn't necessarily disagree with any of that. I just was willing to embrace it. I was willing to say like, yeah, I am a terrible person, And I'm okay with that. I don't need other people to approve of me. I approve of myself. I can defend myself and why I feel this way. All these things I like, it makes sense why I like them. There's good reasons for it, as I can explain. And maybe it's not normal and maybe other people will frown on it, but it makes sense to me and I'm confident in it. So I really do advise that if you see yourself as an otaku and you feel similarly, if you feel any pressure from society as a result of the things you're interested in, then Otaku no Video is a great way to sort of combat those feelings. And granted, today, being an otaku is not nearly as much of a weirdo thing. I mean, nerd culture is mainstream culture these days. Anime is becoming mainstream. You know, Attack on Titan and Sword Art Online have sort of and Death Note has sort of pushed it into the mainstream, where you've got like Netflix fucking doing original anime now and stuff, and a live action Death Note TV adaptation, or Netflix adaptation rather. The culture is spreading. You know, you can buy anime crap in regular stores now. It's everywhere. It's permeated. Most people have heard of it. So I don't think there's as many people who are looked at as utterly insane for being as into anime as maybe I am. Like, I don't even really get shit on for all the posters in my room, which is kind of incredible. I mean, I guess people kind of expect it from an anime guy, but I've very, very rarely gotten comments that are like, this guy's a freak, or like, wow, like you're a loser, you know, for this. I mean, I guess not a lot of those people would find my videos, but I really would expect more of that from the amount of fucking shit that's in my room. I barely even get made fun of for the fucking one on my ceiling of a girl touching herself. So I doubt that there's as much of a need for Otaku no Video, which very much was a punk rock kind of show. It was supposed to be a fuck the established order, fuck what people think about me, this is who I am. It's very out there, particularly in that it cuts to all these live action segments, which is like a totally like weird and arty move on the part of this OVA, because it just didn't give a fuck. And that was very much the mindset of Gainax, and would continue to be. Really, you'd see it emerge again with Imaishi, which is kind of funny because Imaishi is like a new generation Gainax guy. He came in a decade into their productions and started off on Evangelion, but he totally matched the identity of Gainax, and when he left to go make Trigger, he brought that fuck you atmosphere right back. Like, right, everything that Gainax had maybe kind of lost a little bit in the later part of their career, or that they weren't really showing off sometimes, Trigger brought it right the fuck back when they made Inferno Cop and Ninja Slayer. It's a different kind of fuck you, but it is still very much a fuck you. Maybe a more artistically sure-handed fuck you. Not as much to prove, more just trying to be irreverent. But still, Otaku no Video is a good time. It's a good show. It's really entertaining, and it definitely fills you with that sense of passion and like, yeah, I am an otaku. So it's worth watching for that, I think. So that about wraps up my thoughts on that. In the next video, I'm probably going to talk about Baccano and my general history with light novels. You've probably heard me talk about this quite a bit in some of my other videos about light novels. I tend to bring it up a lot, but I think it'd be entertaining to sort of go through the whole thing in one podcast and say my whole piece on like what shows I liked back then and why they mattered so much. So that's going to be the next one. I hope you'll come back and see me then.